What if everything you think you know about cycling nutrition is not just wrong, but actually making you slower? Today I'm sitting down with Dr. Sam Impey. He's working with some of the biggest names in cycling, from Tom Pidcock to Filippo Ganna. He's the scientist who literally rewrote how Tour de France winners fuel their bodies. And he's about to reveal why the 120 grams of carbohydrate protocol that's taking over professional cycling might be the biggest mistake amateur cyclists are making. Plus, he'll explain the AI technology that's helping World Tour riders personalize their nutrition down to the minute. If you're serious about cycling performance, the next 90 minutes will completely change how you think about fueling. It's Dr. Sam Impey. Sam, thank you for making the trip.
No stress at all. Good to be here.
Really excited. Obviously, you're one of the most renowned experts in the whole space of nutrition, so it's a privilege to sit down and expose my ineptitude in the whole area with a true expert.
That's kind. I think there's a fair few of us, but I'll take that definitely.
I want to dive in and start with this idea of high carbohydrate.
Sure.
90 grams of carbohydrate, 120. We're seeing some pro riders pushing 150. I spoke to Alex Wilds, the gravel rider, and he was talking about lads pushing 190 plus at Unbound only a few weeks ago. It's gone high octane, the carbohydrate intake. My rogue science understanding of this is the limiting factor isn't going to be the carbohydrate or the glycogen we're getting into our muscles, but our ability to absorb and transport that glucose and fructose without the stress. How do we think about this carbohydrate consumption in the context of amateurs just mimicking what pros are doing? They're all looking and saying, hey, they're doing 120 grams an hour. I should be doing 120 grams an hour. It's fine taking 120 grams an hour, but do we have an ability to use 120 grams per hour?
Yeah, I think it's like, I mean, geez, it's topical. I'd love to do a quick count on how many articles are published, like blog posts to put out on fueling, intra-workout fueling every week. Pretty high. I think there's like, how long have we got?
Unlimited.
So I think there's a few factors. Like when you look at simple maths to get going, right? Difference between the lads who are doing Unbound for
10 hours for
10 hours, for winning time, at average powers of,
like, they're high for me. They'd be a high zone 3 from, probably high zone 3 for them because they're lighter as well. I'd say 300 watts nearly.
Okay, so like total energy output, massive, right? Guys in the pro peloton, Milan San Remo, 6 hours, whatever it is, stage of the tour that are coming up, 200 Ks, pretty high power output. Depends on what job you're doing in the peloton, obviously, but pretty high power output, massive energy output. You and me out on a Sunday ride, even if we're doing 4 hours, say longer one, 3-4 hours, like good power output, good energy output for us. But the gap is going to be
watts.
The gap's going to be enormous in total energy cost, right? So I always think, like, just start at that point, like the difference in the need from a lot of the amateurs, just pure from an energy perspective, to the riders who are doing these massive days on the bike. There's your first point of difference, right?
I've never even heard it explained like that before, because for me I'd heard these generic recommendations like 60, 70, 80, 90, whatever. So someone would say, if you're doing an endurance ride, it's 60 grams per hour, but I never thought about it as a function of my ability or my function of my threshold power. Like if I've we work with clients who have quite low threshold powers in some cases. Some might have 220 watts, or if you take Sarah, who's training for Badlands this year, like Sarah will do 270 watts for 20 minutes. Like it's good for her and she's progressing, but in the scheme of things, if you're mimicking what a World Tour rider's doing, they'll ride that power for 15 hours if they have to.
And so, like, I suppose where I'm going with it, like, that's just like fundamental difference, part one. So then you look at, like, well, what goes into that for the higher output guys, the World Tours, the Badlands, your 20, 25, 28, maybe 30 hours a week of training. And that's also matched with, 8 to 12 grams per kilo, probably every day of carb, or call it 5 to 10, easier numbers, right? Of carb intake. So that whole process just begins to like increase your body's ability to eat, digest, absorb, and burn carbs, because that's like all they're doing.
So there's a gut efficiency level almost. Like the gut is a muscle we can train to get more productive at processing carbohydrates.
Yeah, more than likely that seems like it. And there's a few like there are a few different components to it. So you can think about it from like an acute, as in 4 weeks leading up to a race, start to add more carbs into your on-bike fueling, with the idea is that you reduce any risk of symptoms and the ability to uptake it are not the same.
So what are we talking about? Symptom? We talk nauseous,
like
cramps?
Feeling heavy, bloated. Unless you have to make an emergency stop, find a toilet somewhere, anything like that. Anything where you're starting to take in carbs, drinks, gels, chews, whatever it is, and you just get that real uncomfortable, like a little bit of cramping or just bloatingness or anything like that.
But that doesn't mean we're not processing the carbohydrates.
So the opposite way around, just because you don't get that doesn't mean that you're absorbing it.
Okay.
If that makes sense. But equally, it also works the other way around. You could still get loads of symptoms, but actually be processing it fine.
Okay.
Both require a tweaking of how you fuel, but they can mean different things, if that makes sense.
Okay, interesting. So point one on this that you were saying was looking at total workload. What other lens do you look at that through?
Yeah, exactly. So total workload is obviously very, very different. Then you get the associated day-to-day diet that goes with it, and the amount of food and carbs that come in and go out every day. That compounds, and also like the lining of your gut. So you're talking about it being like a muscle that you can train.
Yeah.
The lining of your gut turns over significantly more often at a higher rate of turnover of the actual cells than your muscles do. So like the lining of your gut will completely replace itself every 5 days. So the internal lining, completely renews itself. So, it's very adaptable and very malleable. And so you can, and that's why I say there's a couple of components to it. It's that long-term associated diet that facilitates 20 hours, 30 hours a week of training. But there's also, in the build up to races, or when pros go on training camps, altitude camps before the tour, as they'll be probably coming down from in the next few days, or, coming down from ready for the tour this year, that in those 2 weeks altitude, on bike fueling will go up. They'll start to use the products that are specific to that team. So, whatever the team sponsor is, whatever they're going to use in the tour. So you just start layering on specificity, and it's all those factors that contribute to that like higher total capacity. So to kind of answer your question, the first question, that's really like, it's a compounding effect of a lot of different systems that make that difference in why, the pros could potentially have above 120 grams an hour. And those, us more mortal bike riders maybe should probably sit a little bit lower than that.
How do you start thinking about, as an amateur rider, what's your framework for landing on your ideal carb intake? Is it trial and error?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So at the moment, I say that it's probably a little bit of trial and error, unfortunately. For more amateur riders, like if you're... General rule of thumb, like I'd have your sort of midpoint at kind of 60 grams an hour, 1 gram a minute. Yeah. Easiest way to think about it, right?
Regardless of intensity.
Let's just for simplicity, let's go with regardless of intensity. So, and then if you're going to go for a longer ride, so if you're going over, pick your number, if you're going over 2 hours, but whatever you feel like a long ride, because if you're new to cycling, 90 minutes might feel like a long ride, but if you're more adapted to it, 3 hours might be a long ride. So if you're going over 3 hours, then, maybe look to increase it a little bit, but see how you feel. If you want to go up to 90, you can, and that's where you look at those glucose and fructose. Maybe that's a different conversation as well. But if you're doing less than 60 minutes, or you're doing kind of somewhere between 60 and 75 minutes, depends on what you want to get out of that session. If you're just going out for a ride and you're going to go to a coffee shop, you probably just take some water with you. You'll be fine. If you're going to go and do some hills, or maybe you've got some tempo work, whatever it is, then maybe put, 30, 40, maybe 50, maybe even 60 grams of carbs, or take 50, 60 grams of carbs with you.
Well, how are we defining success and failure on this though? Because you're saying that like gastric pain, nausea, these symptoms aren't necessarily an indication that I'm not processing the carbohydrates. Yeah. So how am I defining what success is at 90 grams of carbs an hour?
Yeah. So it's a really good question. So, I mean, I would first of all make sure that you can ingest it, or whichever the amount is that you kind of want to use.
It's staying down.
Yeah. So ingest it comfortably, in forms that are familiar and easy for you, to process and ingest. That's probably the kind of primary outcomes. When you start looking at it slightly longer term, so actually when you aggregate how that session felt, did you come off that session and go, do you know what? I actually felt I felt pretty good there. Or once you've aggregated a couple of weeks of training and you've started to fuel better during your training, it's the thing we see most often with the feedback that we get from how we recommend fueling with exercises. People go, geez, I don't know. They like, it's so funny. They say it out loud. They go, something's changed, but I just can't put my finger on what it is. You're like, well, maybe you're fueling a little bit better, fueling your workouts a little bit better.
And it's an interesting observation because I spoke to Derek Friel, the Training Peaks founder, the other day, and I was asking him, what's the difference between the top 1% of users on the platform, like the highest achievers, from Primoz Roglic's Training Peaks account all the way down to your Weekend Warrior training account. And he said the feedback they put in for themselves after each session, the ability to use the notes section so they can look back then and trace patterns, and they could say, hey, I'm on a period of really good form. Instead of going, I'm on a period of really good form and I have no idea why I landed there. Now I can look back at all the comments and say, actually, I changed my fueling. Yeah. That's why I'm on a period of really good form, because I can see it traced in these comments because I've documented my fueling strategy across the Training Peaks. And obviously with you guys, you can historically look back at your fueling as well. If on the one side, if we think about this as a continuum for this experiment, so I'm going out the door and I'm trying 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour. You're telling me how I know if I've taken too little, but at what point on the top end is there kind of diminishing marginal returns? Am I no longer getting a benefit from adding the extra 10 grams if I'm pushing up to 120, 130, 140, whatever the number is?
Yeah, so that's there's kind of two components to that. So there is now a company in the UK that you can do testing of your body's ability to process and absorb exogenous carbohydrate oxidation.
Cool. What's that called?
It's called Exoanalytics. We go edit this bit out or not, but full disclosure, like I'm involved as an advisor of it. So
that's cool.
Just to disclose that. So Dr. Jamie
Pugh, I might get a discount.
You might do, yeah. So Dr. Jamie Pugh, who you've had on
the podcast as well, great lad.
He's the founder.
Oh, no way.
Yeah,
I must get you. I really enjoy chatting with him. Very knowledgeable.
Talk about credibility for the product, right? So Jamie's the founder there. So great. So he's that sort of expanding that capacity to begin to test it. And so in answer to your question, like what's the sort of value out of progressively increasing? Well, actually measure what your ceiling is and then tailor your fueling around that. Without that, so outside of testing, again, like if you're progressively increasing the amount that you're taking in on bike, then again, I would kind of align that with what's the goal? What are you trying to get to? Like just because you can take in 150 grams an hour on a 2-hour bike ride doesn't mean you should.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of, I think there's a trade-off there between what are you trying to achieve?
Well, I guess if I'm trying to optimize performance, or even if I break that down, because that sounds quite vague, optimize performance, maximize my adaptation or my return on my training time investment. If I'm going out the door for 2 hours, I want to maximize the adaptation I can get within that 2-hour win.
Correct. Exactly. And so in which case there's no need to overfuel that session because you will dampen the training responses. Like we there's plenty of evidence that shows that actually you can, potentially harm some of those adaptations if you massively overfuel.
Interesting. Okay. So break that down for me, because my understanding of it is that training is stress, and we want to stress the body in order for it to repair, recover, adapt, to move to the next level. If we overfuel with carbohydrates, we're somehow dampening the stress.
Exactly. So the way in which you're dampening it, so you might still get the physical, the mechanical work done, right? It's the same mechanical work, whatever it is, 2 hours at 200, 250 watts, pick your numbers, right? So that's mechanical work that's very measurable. But by changing how much you're fueling during the session, that will change how much energetic stress is put on the muscle.
You're changing the cost of the work almost?
Exactly, yeah. Or you're changing the flux through the fuel tank, if you think about it. And so where a lot of people went kind of early 2010s, that kind of stuff, like maybe went a little bit too far the other way into like
fall in the door.
Super, yeah. So like because you can undercook it, and you obviously very viscerally feel the effects of that. But the trade-off there is you're losing the quality of that mechanical work. So what we're trying to do is find that balance point of sustaining good training quality, keeping that mechanical work that you're going to get done, but also creating the correct metabolic stress, so that energy stress inside the muscles, because that's a really potent driver of adaptation.
Just when people thought fueling was getting easy.
Exactly. Hey, let's all got simpler, guys. Don't worry about it.
So we need to think about it now in terms of there's strategic reasons to underfuel, overfuel, and optimally fuel. How do you think about when to employ each of these strategies?
Sure. I think that maybe this is a challenging piece, right? Because I think semantically, strategically underfueling just doesn't sound, I don't know, there's something that I cognitively struggle with that a little bit, but I know what you mean. So I think I'm trying to think of like how to articulate it in a way that isn't going to get people to be like, cool, yeah, I'm actually falling in the door 3 times a week, but it's strategic, but I've made the decision to do that.
French teams are probably still there.
Well, hey, you'll have to ask them. But I think the like using different types of training, right? So it's periodization of training. Periodization of nutrition is it's the same thing. So you don't always do the same training session every day because it doesn't change the stimulus. Yeah. Same thing with nutrition. So my personal opinion is that used in the correct way, faster training is fine. I think it's a different way to create stress through different metabolic processes in the muscle, right? That's not for everybody. Certainly wouldn't recommend long periods of fasted training for younger athletes, et cetera, et cetera. Anyone who's at low energy risk, for example, maybe not for them, or use it cautiously, fine. But I think I think it has a strategic use in a training period, right? Equally, going and doing a training session where you're very highly fueled and you fuel well during it has a different goal. It's a completely different goal, right? You're not going to go out and do VO2 efforts like, maybe you will fasted first thing in the morning if it just fits in with your lifestyle, but maybe you've had a big carb dinner the night before. But generally speaking, you'd want to go into those VO2 efforts well fueled, carbed up. But maybe if you're doing low and slow, that's fine to do fasted.
So maybe that answers my next question. Would you think about it in terms of the glycemic demand of the session? So if I'm doing the stuff that just feels like it's actually viscerally ripping the glycogen out my muscles. Like last night, I went out and done 12 1-kilometer efforts with 1 minute gaps in them. You can feel that high glycogen demand in that session, as opposed to I'll go on the Sunday spin with the roadman. We've had podcast meetup sessions on Sundays. We'll cruise 90 minutes to the calf, have some food in the calf, cruise 90 minutes home. I don't feel like there's a high glycogen demand of that session. Is that a lens we could think about it through? Thinking about what is the glycogen demand of each of these sessions?
Exactly. A really nice way to think about it. Of the 2 sessions you described, I know which one I prefer to do. So, but you're exactly right. And anything that gets up to or above FTP, like a really like good barometer to think about it. Once you get above that, the rate at which you burn through glycogen just becomes exponential. So you really can rip through it pretty quickly. So it's a good way to think about it, definitely.
So if you've extensive experience working with pro athletes, and I know you don't have as much of a foot in the camp of what your average weekend warriors are doing, but is there something that you think where you look at all the World Tour athletes and you think they all have these habits around nutrition, and I don't see these habits in Joe Public?
The ones I think are most consistent, and I would say this is a recent change in the pros, which I think is beginning to be reflected in Joe Public, is actually fueling their training well. So actually kind of thinking a little bit more about, do you know what, maybe I will take a gel out with me. I know I'm only going out for 75 minutes.
If you took a gel out of training, like I was driving for a French team in 2012, and I remember being in the break of one of these Coupe de France races, like 200k across gravel and stuff. Like being in the break thinking like, I actually have a chance here today. Going back to the car and saying, can I get a gel? The manager saying, no, you've had your gel for today. I was like, it's probably still happening. I have Stephen Barrett from As She Does Air on later in the season, the head coach. So it'd be interesting to hear an Irish guy's perspective on French culture there. And if that's, I'm sure it's changed a bit, but culturally, they were a nation that underfueled for a long time.
I look, it was tied to a lot of those cultural and systemic beliefs in cycling as a sport, right? Like that's kind of continental Europe cycling's homeland, right? So like I get where it came from, and it's one of those things that I think like you can technology has moved on, right? Bikes, like all the kit has definitely got better, but I don't think the magnitude of change that you've seen in the average power output and like the average speeds that the races are being done at now, like if you look at how quickly those have jumped, I don't think there's a correlation with the bike kit. Like there's a function of the way in which the guys and girls are training that's directly correlating to the ability to not only produce power at a greater watts per kilo, but also sustain it for longer durations. So, and I think, maybe I'm biased, right? I'm a nutritionist, I'm going to say this, but I think there's a huge element of how well they're fueling in training, which is now we're really beginning to see that translate into longer, more just in, you know, when you just look at some of those riders at the end of races and you're like, how the fuck are you doing that?
Well, did you see Pogacar's data from the Dauphiné?
Like seated, just like
7.2 watts per kilogram for 22 minutes.
Frightening.
So, and even a good snapshot of this was, if you heard the Geraint Thomas podcast last week, Geraint Thomas talked, there's almost a snapshot because G is finishing up this season. So it's like a snapshot of 2 generations here.
Yeah.
G obviously won the Tour de France in 2018, but he was saying at his very best powers, best weight, that would have meant him doing 490 watts. And his very best, he could have sustained that for 8 to 9 minutes. Pogacar's doing it not at his very best in a warm-up race for 22 minutes.
Yeah, it's like frightening. But so I think that so I started in World Tour 2018, and like a benchmark figure that you'd be looking at for a GC rider would be if you can climb for 30 minutes at 6.2 watts per kilo, 6.2, 6.4 watts per kilo, you're probably in the ballpark of, you know, depends on who shows up and who's in form, but like you'll be in the money for winning stages and maybe even, you know, maybe winning Grand Tours, right? Not anymore.
No, domestiques are doing that. Like I've
exactly.
Jay Vine's been on the podcast loads of times. Jay's doing those sort of figures plus.
Yeah, exactly. So, and honestly, like I'm so convinced that the fueling training and how that's aggregated over a number of years is a not the only, but is a big driver to that. And like come back to your question before. Like I think the general public, as they start to absorb that and see it and feel it, and we had a conversation about fueling, you know, grams per hour on bike. I honestly think I'd love to see some data on the average power output at a club ride from 5 years ago, and then 5 years in the future, and see if it's shifted, as you know, that correlation of fueling better during training has as well.
I think by and large, the move to better fueling has been a net positive. There was a time, especially when I was trying to make it as a pro, riding, coming up through the French ranks. They tried to turn everybody into a 62 kilogram climber, regardless of your build. I'm 6'3". I was never going to be a 5'2" Colombian, but going out there, I'm walking around at 80 kilograms now. I feel like I'm pretty lean. You know, I'm not ripped, but I'm pretty lean.
Yeah.
And I was racing at 68 kilograms in France, and my director was pinching me. He's like, and you were hiding croissants in the washing machine and the whole culture.
Really? I've never heard that. Hiding in the washing machine on the bus.
So we had, our apartment was above Boulangerie. So the scent of these croissants.
I mean, what a horrible place to house bike riders. That's terrible. Sorry, go on.
So we'd go down and get our baguettes and our croissants in the morning, but the manager would come around like for a house check every now and then. He'd come looking through the presses, make sure you had no bread or no cakes. So we'd have to take them all, put them into a pillowcase, stuff them into the washing machine, and then put the dirty clothes in on top of them. So they're like spot searches, like the FBI
That's
coming on a raid.
insane.
But around then, like I had friends riding for BMC, and I'm not sure if you've heard this one before, but BMC at the time, I'm not sure if it was, I don't want to tar the whole team with this, but individuals within the team were taking medication to decalcify their bones so they'd be a little bit lighter.
Yeah. Do you know what? It doesn't surprise me. I haven't heard that directly before, but like when I started 2018, I think it was coming off the back of some of the the worst nutrition stuff was kind of over, and they were sort of starting to, like, Visma was already a big driver of moving to performance nutrition at that stage. So like Asker Ukendrup was leading the nutrition setup there and really beginning to move things forward. So, but when I came in, it was like I was, like heard discussions of, or heard things through the grapevine where it's like, oh, well, can I get an arm sling for the off season? Because if you just have your arm in a sling, you get atrophy the muscles. Yeah, exactly. So, and I was like, and it's actually, it's interesting. Like you have the Jonas Abrahamsson from Uno, who, and like Olav, the coach there, who's like, actually, when you look at if you look at
Olaf Boo's the coach?
So also he has some is helping to direct some of the coaching staff there, I think, and set some set some direction towards like, training philosophy and stuff. They're like, well, look, actually, functional mass is like, when you plot it, it's actually really good for power output and durability, and you're less likely to get sick. And it's all these things that you kind of go.
I remember having this conversation with friends who were riding at continental level in Belgium, and they were like, one friend in particular, a really good training partner of mine over the years, like 6'5" rider, and he's down at like 70 kilograms, 71 kilograms. And you're trying to say to him, it's just doesn't mirror the demands of racing in Belgium. Like, you would be better off as an 80 kilogram rider who can blow it in the crosswinds, because you're still not getting up a Cat 1 at 70 kilograms.
Nope.
Like, you're not going to be 52 kilograms. You're 6'5".
Yeah.
But instead of that, we had everyone like as a tiny little rider, instead of saying, hey, there's different roles within a team. Like Ryan Mullen now is good lad, been on show a few times. But Ryan's a great example of, if you just niche now, it needs all types of different shapes. Ryan positions the lead out man. That's his entire job, to position the lead out man. Makes a really good living from it. He's a legit World Tour rider who's had contract 100%. After contract with just that. And he's an 80 kilo plus rider, but he can do 800 watts for a minute.
Yeah. And I think there's like, I don't know, again, whether it comes to, maybe you'd be better placed to answer this than I would. Maybe I'm going to ask you a question. But with the specialization of rider positions now, like, do you think that's more prevalent than it was before? Like, my understanding was, it was like you'd kind of have your rouleurs, your bigger guys who would just kind of do some grunt work, keep the GC guys out of the wind on the flats, like positioning, that kind of stuff. Which I feel now that you have specific lead out men for certain, depending on what the kind of sprint finish is. Equally, you have climbers.
I think the segmentation of it is increased. I think before you were nearly dividing into leaders and domestiques. Now you're dividing domestiques into different brackets. Correct. Here's a guy who can ride the valleys well. Here's a guy we can use as a tool in the crosswinds. But the interesting thing that I'm actually observing is the evolution of an athlete within that segmentation. So the athletes who used to be, say a Rafael Micah at the moment is normally Pogacar's last lad. When Micah hits the front, stuff's about to go bad for everyone else.
You see everyone else go, oh, fuck.
Exactly. But as Micah loses that edge now, I think you'll watch him become the third man. Sure. And maybe someone else will step up into that role. And Micah might evolve to the point where he's at the bottom of that segmentation, where he's, controlling early breakaways, or he's doing bottles earlier in the day.
I mean, I was actually going to say, the one that just popped into mind was Wout van Aert for Simon Yates in the Giro.
The greatest domestique in the world.
I like put him up the road. That he was obviously in the break, and then Simon got to him on what was the name of the climb?
Finestra.
Yes. Got to him. And then there was I saw some, I don't know how true it was, but like, I hope it's true, some mad numbers that he did 400 and something watts for 12 minutes or something. I'm like, first off, like, he's clearly a very good bike rider, but also strategically, like, what a great decision that was. Actually, who have we got who's probably strong enough that deep into a Grand Tour that can go out in the break and still have a bit left in the tank to do this kind of job. And then hopefully, you know, we'll bring Simon up and he'll make use of that, execute it perfectly, and climbed it in 58, 59 minutes. Like,
and everyone was abusing Froome years ago, saying he was lit when he went up at 5.5 minutes slower than Yates.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that was I think that climb was the first time that they used SIS beta fuel when Froome did it.
Didn't know that.
Yeah, I think so. So that was they had people with bottles like every kilometer or something like that.
That was your nutrition equivalent, and splitting the atom.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I think James Morton would be the better one to talk about that. I think he was there and involved in the build of it.
We'll definitely get him on. I know David's spoken about bringing him over to get him on. But what are we thinking on this? Because when David, your co-founder in Hexus, was on the podcast, if anyone hasn't checked that, I'll link it below because it's definitely worth going back, and it's almost like this chat's almost a continuation of that one. We talked a lot about the 90 to 120 gram an hour, but a lot of the comments came back on that going, do we know what this is doing to us long term? Because it's only started. Do we have data on the effect? Like you're saying, the gut can regenerate every 5 days, but does that insulate us from the effects of it, or is there effects of it?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'll give you the value of my opinion because I'm not an epidemiologist. I don't know if there is long-term data on it. And again, the way I look at it is probably related to I always take this back to the work that you're doing, right? So if you're putting large amounts of carbs in, but you're also burning large amounts of carbs every week, fill up the tank, empty the tank, fill up the tank, empty the tank. That's a good thing, generally speaking, right? And that keeps everybody metabolically flexible and healthy. You're unlikely to get any metabolic diseases, that kind of stuff. And to my knowledge, there's no evidence that has any big impacts on your digestive tract. I think the one thing that might be interesting to look at is you get a sports dentist on and they can tell you whether it does anything to the oral cavity, that kind of stuff. Again, not my wheelhouse, so I won't comment on it, but I'll happily come back on and throw eggs if a dentist does come on and throw some question bombs in there. But I think that where the discourse comes, and you've kind of seen this historically in the shift in Western diets, is readily accessible carbohydrates that are hyperpalatable. Great, let's have loads of those because they're easy for me to get and they're delicious, and my body processes them really fast, so I feel hungry again. But you don't have that big work, empty the tank again. And that's where I think the kind of disconnect happens, and that's where you get those not beneficial things. But for me, I think if you're using a little bit of nutrition periodization, so again, like I said, like I don't think it's high carb all the time, but it's when it's appropriate. I think go high. Like if you're going after 12 1K efforts, if you're going after that, for me that's high carb. But equally, in a couple of days' time, you're going out for a recovery spin. Cool, just have breakfast and off you go, or have an omelette and off you go, and you'll be fine. And that creates two very different stimulus.
I know one of your big studies was this fuel for work required. How does that sit against the idea of metabolic flexibility? You've heard a lot of, and again, we had this chat off air. I never know how to grade the experts on who's the credible experts and who's the not so credible experts, or who has vested interests and stuff. But I've heard experts on podcasts talking about one of the signs for health is, and I use the word health, not performance, because we talk about the World Tour guys a lot, and I often don't think they are what we should be emulating. Because if you look what they're optimizing for performance. Downstream of performance isn't always health. For me and you, I think we should be optimizing for health. And I think there is some performance downstream from health, but not to the same degree as the other guys. So a lot of the health doctors I've listened to, like I said, Rhonda Patrick, who's very popular on podcasts, she talks about the idea of metabolic flexibility being a cornerstone of metabolic health. Yeah. How does that sit with the idea of fuel for work required? Or maybe explain fuel for work required so someone doesn't know what we're talking about.
Yeah, 100%. The good thing is that fuel for the work required is entirely designed to facilitate metabolic health or metabolic flexibility, which is great. So fuel for the work required as a concept, hopefully it kind of comes back to my line of thinking and what I've been talking about so far. But on days where you're doing a lot of work, fuel more. and on days where you're doing less, fuel less, and on rest days, maybe it's less again, and thinking slightly about what you've got the following day. So, maybe there's like a little bit of prep going into tomorrow, but you're trying to align your energy and particularly carbohydrate intake with, what you're doing in terms of exercise and physical activity that day. That's the fundamental piece of it. So instead of, there's some, I'm just trying to think, like that classic kind of recommendation of like 2,500 calories a day.
Regardless.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and the problem with that is that, okay, at the end of the week, you might still be in energy balance. So you might not lose weight, you might not gain weight, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's metabolically healthy for you, because on some days you'll be massively underfueled and on some days you'll be massively overfueled. So what Fuel for the Work Required really tries to get people to think about is, well, actually, can I just create some differences on those days? And by doing that, that actually facilitates what I would refer to as metabolic health. So your body's, when I think about it, particularly in the context of exercise, for me, that's my body's ability to utilize fat and carbohydrates effectively, depending on the intensity and the duration of exercise. And think of it like a dimmer switch. It's not on off. It's always a dimmer switch.
That's a really
and
nice analogy. I've never heard that.
All you're doing is turning that dimmer switch up and down. And you can do that by changing the intensity of exercise. So higher intensity exercise, you turn that dimmer switch towards carbohydrates. So more carbs and less fat. Lower intensity exercise, particularly over a longer duration. As the duration increases, you're going to be slowly turning that dimmer switch more and more towards fat.
Do you remember a few years ago when Froome was at the height of his power? Now, how much of this was smoke and mirrors, I don't know. James Morton, again, might be able to tell us. But there was a lot of Froome getting up in the morning before a hard session on Mount Teeda and an Instagram picture of him eating scrambled eggs and smoked salmon for breakfast.
Yep.
The underlying message that was sent out to cyclists was it's possible to move the threshold of where we burn fat. So at the moment, if I'm entirely fueled on fat, up to 200 watts, if I do enough fat-adapted rides, I'll be able to ride at 250, 280, 300 watts, utilizing entirely fat, preserving glycogen for later in a race when I need it more. And this was kind of the story we were sold why Froome was so effective on final hilltop finishes, because he was preserving more glycogen.
Yep. The fantastic thing is that just out of shot, there was a massive bowl of porridge. And also the biochemistry of that just doesn't stand up. So I think Froome and maybe James was involved as well, I don't know, but I think Froome was maybe he was the first influencer and he just didn't even know it back in the day. So it's an interesting one. I think it was very... maybe it was unintentional, maybe it was intentional, but I think it was a smart strategic decision on his part. And I'm remarkably confident that, there was also a big old bowl of porridge just out of shot there. Is
it totally flawed, or is there any truth to the idea that we can change our ability to produce power at that fat threshold?
So you absolutely can, and it's definitely trainable. I suppose the sort of first thing to point out is that until you get many hours into exercise, you will never be at 100% fat oxidation. In fact, you'd never be at 100% fat oxidation, because if the carbohydrate oxidation process in your muscles stopped, the way chemistry works, it would never restart again and you'd die.
Okay.
So there is that. That might not be entire. I'm sure there's going to be a biochemist screaming at me there somewhere, but you get the gist of it, right? And so when you start exercise, certainly for the first couple of hours, even if you've had a high fat, low carb diet and you're exercising at a low intensity, that dimmer switch isn't going to be 100% fat.
Okay.
There's always going to be a carbohydrate component to it. Now, in answer to your question, like, can you train it? Yeah, you absolutely can train it. And so using things like Fuel for the Work Required, where your lower intensity rides are fueled with lower amounts of carbohydrate.
Not zero.
Not zero, but lower. Maybe you do some rides fasted if it's appropriate and contextually, right for you and your experienced rider, fine. And that, creates a slightly different stimulus again. And so you're training your body's enzymes and those metabolic processes that liberate and then burn fat as a substrate. what you're doing is you're kind of increasing the flux through those. And then as you get into, and as that increases, as you increase your body's ability to do that, with training, again, what you're going to do is you'll see that you call it, so are you familiar with like a fat max? People talk about that. Yeah. So like the power at which you reach fat.
Maybe explain it. I've done the fat max test, but Sean Wakefield just stuck me on the rig and it's like, here's your fat max.
Sure. So fat max would be you start at very low intensity and you gradually increase it very, 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 very slowly, much slower than a VO2 max test. And basically what you see is fat oxidation go up, and then once it peaks, and it will start to come back down again as the intensity continues to increase. And essentially it's the power at which your peak fat oxidation occurs, right? So that will shift to the right, and it will go. You can add watts to that number by diet and training, and there are kind of a number of reasons you might do that. Again, using more fat, preserving carbohydrate as an energy source, a store of energy source in your muscles at low intensity, very, very useful. So the context being, if you can ride all day, but then there's a steep climb to get home, and you want to get up it a bit easier, that's going to be a lot easier if you've preserved a little bit of that muscle glycogen in that ride.
And so if I'm training and we've two, if you look and staying with the kind of curve analogy, you have two notable points on a lactate curve. You've LT1, your first inflection point, you've LT2, your second inflection point. A normal training plan, the underlying goal is, can we move those curves to the right? Yeah. If we're moving those curves to the right by virtue of just normally training, is the fat max going to move in tandem with those?
More than likely, yes. So just general training will improve your aerobic capacity. And, you see even, we talk about these world tour athletes who are at, monumental carb intake numbers. Their fat oxidation is still going to be prestigiously high because they've got great VO2 maxes. Their LT1 and LT2s are pretty far to the right. It's all connected. And you can make tweaks to that. So you can sort of like artificially raise it through diet. But that's, I'm not convinced, unless you're doing like ride across America, or, one of the like 2000K rides. Unless you're getting into that kind of distance, I'm not sure of the immediate benefit from a performance perspective, if that makes sense.
Have you tried to watch pro bike racing this season? It's an absolute nightmare. The only thing that's maintained my sanity this season and allowed me to keep following pro cycling, it's Surfshark VPN. With Surfshark, I can set my location virtually anywhere. So geo-blocked content, gone. Whether I'm trying to catch the highlights from Europe, watch the coverage in the US, or follow pro races around the world, Surfshark makes sure I never miss a beat. But that's just the start. It also protects your personal data on public networks. So next time you're sitting in the airport lounge or a cafe trying to upload your Strava file from the day, you're not opening yourself up to hackers and snoopers. One of my favorite features, you can use it across unlimited devices with a single subscription. So I've got it running on my laptop, my phone, my tablet, and Sarah even uses my subscription too. Plus, Surfshark has a clean private search engine called Surfshark Search. No ads, no trackers, just pure results, which is especially handy when I'm researching guests or training topics, without being bombarded by pop-ups all the time. And here's the kicker, it's completely risk-free for 30 days with a money-back guarantee. So here's what to do right now. Go to surfshark.com/roadman, or you can use the code ROADMAN at checkout to get an extra 4 months of Surfshark VPN. That's surfshark.com/roadman, and I've dropped the link and the code in the show notes down below. And what about intermittent fasting? It's got a bit of a tailwind in the past few years behind it. This 16-8 protocol, one of the reasons people will say it's cellular autophagy, it's this kind of cellular cleanup.
Yep.
Another secondary reason might be that it compresses your feeding window. So you've gone from a 24, well, maybe not quite a 24-hour feeding window, say a 14-hour feeding window, down to an 8-hour feeding window. So even if you're not super disciplined, hard to be in a massive calorie surplus in a condensed feeding window. My challenge with intermittent fasting has always been, especially when I'm training, is I can't find a good place to put that.
Yeah.
Because I'm either, especially if I'm thinking through a lens of fuel for work required, where it's like, okay, I'm either fueling for tomorrow's session or I'm recovering from today's session. Where does it go in my week? Is there merit to trying to figure out where to put that in my week, or is it just something that I should forget about?
Ooh, good question. I might have to charge you for this answer. It's a good test of a nutritionist, that. I think the 16-8, the way I think about it, and again, like, tell me if this is your reflection as well, is that it's a really convenient way. It's an easy mental model to think about how to create an energy, potentially an energy deficit, right?
Yes.
You just like, it sort of removes some of the thinking, it just removes cognitive load. And nutrition's hard, right? It's difficult to get your nutrition right. I'm a nutritionist. I know for a fact I don't get my nutrition right, and I've got no excuse. So, like all the time. So it's high cognitive load, right? And so 16-8 is just a really clear framework where you go, I'm going to do this. And it's really easy to operationalize. Yeah. So I think there's value in that if it's something that's beneficial for you and it fits in with your lifestyle. It fits in with your work schedule, the kids, like training, whatever it is. If that's a framework that works for you, then that's great. The challenge, as you say, is how do you, if you're going to go for longer, harder rides, or if you're, training's ramping up because you're getting close to a sportif or an event that you've got on, how do you package good training and good fueling within that framework? That takes a little bit of figuring out. But equally, I guess what I would say is, why don't you think about how and where you apply it? So maybe on your biggest training days, that might actually be a day where you fuel kind of, you spread your meals out a little bit more, and actually you kind of fuel on bike, and you're less concerned about that specific framework because the goal of that day is to achieve quality work. But within some of the lower intensity or lower total duration days, that's probably fine to package into like a 16-8 type day.
Yeah, but I guess the challenge for a lot of amateurs is, like, I still work with and coach a lot of amateur guys as well. So most people that are working a 9-to-5 job, balancing some sort of conflicting demands in their time, set their week up as Monday normally off the bike after a longer weekend, Tuesday some sort of interval session, Wednesday cruisier, maybe a cadence session, Thursday your second hard session of the week, Friday either off for some sort of recovery ride, although Professor Seiler will debate the merits of a recovery ride. He said it's like you're either riding or you're recovering. There's no such thing as a recovery ride. Saturday, Sunday are longer distance stuff with the club, or just long, slow distance. So with that kind of setup and the fuel for work required lens, I struggle to know where to put that in, because if I stick it in on Monday, which is my rest day, which is the least active I'm going to be all week, but I've one of my hardest sessions of the week coming up on Tuesday. Sure. I always go into that feeling under fueled. Wednesday, I feel like I'm recovering from Tuesday, but also preparing for Thursday's hard session. Doesn't make sense there. Friday, well, I'm recovering from Thursday, but I'm also going into my 2 longest rides of the weekend. I need an extra day to stick this in.
Yeah, true.
Which there is merit to this, because this is, again, Seiler spoke to me about this. Expanding your training week to 10 days.
Oh, that's a good way.
First time I'd ever heard of it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've never thought about that either.
I've never played with it.
Or working in, I suppose, or working in longer, shorter blocks. I suppose either extend it to 10 or shorten it to 3.
Yeah.
Depends which way you look at it. Yeah, it's a good point. And I think maybe that comes back to maybe there's something to play around with, like on bike fueling then. So actually, why don't you keep your meals on the weekday ones, why not keep your meals within that? If it's something that you're using, like keep the main meals within the framework. But actually, if you know that quality of work is what you're going after, let's look at how on-bike fueling changes.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to look at it. But looking again through the lens of not performance, true health, is it worth squeezing in the 16-8? Is there enough benefit in the fast to merit the disruption it's causing to a training week?
I would always go back to if it works for you. So my lens on it isn't that 16-8 per se is particularly beneficial, because for some people it really doesn't work. Yeah. For some people it works, and that's I suppose that's where I come to as a point of separation. I'm not hugely opinionated, unfortunately, on whether it's massively beneficial or massively detrimental, because I think it comes down to do you know what? It might work for you one week and not next week.
Yeah.
Because
and this is the problem for when you're not a pro athlete, your schedule just isn't always
dynamic.
The same.
Yeah, exactly. So it's one of those things. I think if and as I say, that's why I sort of started out with, like, if it works for you, then it's a great framework because it's a good mental model. Yeah. But I think there's a lot of different ways to achieve a strategic calorie deficit, to lose weight, or to create different metabolic stress in and out of your training.
Okay, so we'll use that hypothetical training week. Your average Joe training 8 to 12 hours a week, with inside that sort of Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday. What is a better way for me to create a calorie deficit in this if I want to lose 2 to 5 kilograms?
Yeah, so I think use Hexus, obviously, is the easiest way. We'll give you a very clear, recommendation each day on how to do it.
And even on that, because I definitely wanted you to answer that question. I don't want to interrupt.
No, sure,
down a different street with it, so we just put a pin in it for a second. But what I was shocked to using Hexus is just how much you eat.
Yeah.
And this is echoed by my friends who are in the World Tour, who just, like, their new job is like their jaws as strong as their quads are. The amount of eating they have to get through for 30 hours at the intensities they're riding per week. They said they can't believe the amount of food, but they also can't believe that they're not gaining weight with that amount of food. Yep. I still haven't, if I'm fully honest, when I see the number on Hexus and I want to drop 2 kilograms, I don't know if I can deprogram myself from that French le métier, that French apprenticeship.
Sure.
Where I'm just like, but how? Like, how can I eat 5,000 calories today?
Still lose weight.
And still lose weight. Like, help me understand.
Yeah. So and again, I have observation and opinion on this, right? I would love to show you some really well-controlled metabolic study data to back it up, but I've got to give you my opinion on this, right? No. So where I've seen this done over and over and over and over and over again, the exact story that you describe, I've never eaten this much in my life, but my skin folds are coming down and my power's going up. I've seen it 100 times, and I genuinely think
I just need to commit.
Yeah. So, but I'll tell you, I tell you why. So the reason that I think is that there's an idea of energy expenditure called a constrained or additive model, right? And so the constrained model says that when you exercise, your resting metabolic rate decreases proportionately, so that the cost of exercise doesn't take you above a total energy expenditure for the day. And that's called a constrained model, right? So your underlying metabolic processes slow down a little bit. That costs less energy. Or you have what's called the additive model, which is where RMR stays the same and you add exercise, the cost of exercise on top. So total energy increases. What I think fueling properly, and this actually ties into World Tour and now recreational people fueling better during training, I think the shift into fueling better generally has actually, and again, it's a sort of slightly loose description, but I actually think what we're doing now is that we're either helping people to sustain what is a normal and healthy resting metabolic rate, and so it's not being compromised at all because they're in a sustained, and when I say sustained, like weeks, months, energy deficit, trying to lose weight the whole time, not having enough carbs. The hypothalamic pituitary axis in your brain is incredibly sensitive to carbohydrates and will release an entire array of hormones that change the metabolic processes inside your body and in your organs. And so I think by fueling better, what we're doing is helping people to maintain healthy and normal and optimal underlying metabolic processes, and that's causing Is there a
lag period? Like if I go from, like, again, it's that programming from living in France, or maybe I'm watching too much TMZ, pop culture, or whatever. But if I want to drop weight for a race so I'm going to do Badlands in September. Sarah's actually a better example because she's doing the exact same thing. She's maybe inherited my bad habits compounded with her teenage years of bad eating habits. But if I wanted to lose weight for that, I'll just dial it on 1,700 calories a day.
Yeah.
Regardless of what training I'm doing.
Yep.
And then I'll fuel on the bike, but I'll stay off the bike at 1,700 calories a day. And I know the weight will come off, but it feels like it gets harder each time.
Yeah.
And with age.
Because it probably does.
Yeah, is it a race to the bottom, that model?
At what age, as you age, your resting metabolic rate naturally decreases. So it will literally get numerically harder every
I'm
time.
I'm 55 having this conversation.
Correct.
I'm
down at 7 calories a day now. Yeah. So yeah, no, it absolutely does. And so is there a lag point? So yeah, you're right. It's not just overnight, but it's quick. Like the human body adapts pretty fast to most things. So, in answer to your question, like how to structure this week, honestly, and it sounds counterintuitive, but like start the thing I always go to first is like, are you feeling well on bike? Yeah. If you're feeling well on bike, and that doesn't mean like we're not talking about optimizing for performance, but just, are you considering whether, you need to take some carbs on bike, or take some protein if you're going over 3-4 hours, fine, whatever it is, like start there. And it is so counterintuitive, I know, but fueling better will help you lose weight.
Yeah.
It's completely counterintuitive. It's an absolute head scratcher, I know.
I know David Dunn's more the behavioral change guy than you, but
100% he is, yeah.
But what do you think around deprogramming someone like me or like Sarah who has this mental model of, to lose weight, I need to restrict? There needs to be an element of almost cathartic suffering for me to get from where I am to where I want to go.
Yeah.
How do we reprogram ourselves to buy into this Hexus model? It's not just a Hexus model, it's prevalent across the whole world tour.
Yeah.
You guys, the group you that came through the university in Liverpool, you've spread your wings and are in all the biggest sports in the world now, from Premier League to the US sports. You've changed fueling entirely from this small group of disciples that James Morton built in Liverpool. How do you get that message to the masses that are still doing it wrong?
Yeah, do you know what? I always think it's that honest reflection of someone who's done it. I don't think there's anything more powerful than that. I can sit here and tell you the science all day long, right? But actually, I think it's one of those things that, we can go through and get some examples from people we've worked with. But when someone goes, I remember, so jockey research is where a lot of that stuff started in Liverpool, right? And the jockeys were going, they were like, you're going to cost me my career. I've never eaten as much in my life. Like you guys are, and there was one guy who was like, I'm going to commit to this. And he was like, I feel phenomenal and I'm at weight. I'm not spending an hour in the sauna before when I get to the ground. And that just propagated. And the same thing happened in the World Tour, right? It probably started with Visma. They started fueling well, combined with having a great roster of riders, right? And then those lads were just fucking flying a few years ago.
It's not like Visma are carrying weight. Like
no,
Greg LeMond was on the podcast and he literally said to me, and here's a quote from Greg. He said, Jonas is the skinniest man I've ever seen. He's like a prisoner of war.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I bet he fuels well. I bet he does. But his body's not in that. His body's not in that compensation, starvation piece. So, a lot of people talk about it like, I didn't feel hungry. I didn't feel like I was in an energy deficit. Yeah. You can create energy deficits and still be metabolically healthy and start to lose weight. But the problem is you need a little bit of help to do that. It's a bit of calculation there, right? And I'm not saying that's easy, because it's not. Otherwise, everyone would do it.
It also slightly changes something that I haven't liked for a long time. Food is so important to us. We're talking about food as fuel, but if we trace the origins of food, it's it's how you bond. You think of some of the best moments in your life.
Yeah, 100%.
Even the blue zones are interesting. On a tangent to this, did you see this thing on the blue zones where, what the blue zones are?
Yeah.
The area, for anyone who doesn't know, they're the areas with the highest concentration of centurions. So Okinawa in Japan, Sardinia in Italy, and scientists have spent a lot of time looking at what are the commonalities that link these. But I seen another one recently where the main thing that links these areas is fraud.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's hilarious. Okay, good.
That there was massive amounts of reissuing of government ideas in most of these areas for different political or conflict type reasons through the years. So a lot of the people that they're saying in Sardinia that are actually 120 years old are actually like 70.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, like, geez, you look good for 103, Okay, wow. Right, okay.
But
I didn't know that.
That's an interesting segue to it. But Sarah would be a great case study, and David's already volunteered to put her into the pro version of the Hexus platform. Be an interesting one, because literally she went out yesterday and done those kilo efforts with me. She's getting ready for Badlands. I came home and had like 3 turkey burgers, because she's like, I need to cut weight, and I've only got a couple of months to do it.
Sure, yeah. Honestly, like it's that it's creating. Again, it sounds counterintuitive. It's creating. It's creating probably smaller changes than you think you need. So I'll have to check the mental math on it, but if you have a flat white every day, I have a flat white almost every day if I can, if I'm going near a coffee shop. I know, aren't I? Extra shot though, because scientist. But if I replace so I have that with cow's milk. So there's sort of rough circa 150 mils of whole milk in there, right? If I replace that with a black coffee, I now do X calories on whole milk, 3% or 5% fat, whatever it is, call it 120 calories. Now, if I multiply that out by 7, you're looking at meaningful amounts of calorie reduction in a week. So, that's, call it 700 or 750 calories a week, circa 100, depends on your body, but like call it 150, 200 grams of mass reduction over a kind of week period. That's just changing it from a flat white to a black coffee. So you look at the smallest changes that you can do. Instead of using olive oil to fry food, use like an oil spray. Yeah. Or if you've got a good non-stick pan, you don't need a oil at all. It's a non-stick pan. That's kind of the job. Air fryer. Exactly. So you think about...
What's that Teflon coating in the air fryer deal too? So I don't even
again, material science, I'm staying well away from. But conceptually, if you remove 10 grams of oil from your day somewhere, that's 100 calories. But it's aggregating those small changes that will create a meaningful difference in your physical outcome. A really interesting one actually. So I did I spent a year at Great Britain Cycling in February 23 to 24 for a maternity cover, helping those guys out. We had the Worlds in Glasgow, which was it was the most successful Worlds for Great Britain Cycling. They got 67 medals across A, B, and Para, whatever it was. It was great, great outcome. But having the year build up there, and some of the incredible work that Georgina Impson-Davey, who was the nutritionist who'd gone on maternity cover, had done, is one of it lived with me and it resonates to this day, is that they don't use the term body weight because it's not factually accurate. That's an opinion. It's body mass, and they really move.
So what's the difference?
So weight is a function of mass plus gravity, whereas mass is a unit. It's a very specific way to classify.
So how's that getting measured? Like displacement in?
So it's like this. It's the same thing. It's not really about the way in which it's measured, but it's about the thought process in going, let's look at your. Sorry, we're not looking at your weight. We're looking at your mass, because we're moving it into a very objective and less emotional state. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, and that's interesting. That's kind of where I was going before I lost my train of thought with the blue zones thing, because we, for a long time, have attached a morality to food.
Correct.
Where we categorize stuff as good food, we categorize stuff as bad food. And I should feel guilty because I've had bad food. And me and David talked about...
I was going to say, I think David mentioned this exactly. It's contextual, right?
Yeah, it's contextual. And we got absolutely hammered in the comments for the last video for trying to say that Haribo is good food. And we're like, well, in the right circumstances, it is good food. Yep. So I want to double down on that, so I get hammered in the comments again.
One of the first things I had to have an argument with the medical staff and a few of the heads of the team when I started in World Tour in 2018, because I was like, where's the Haribo? Let's get it on the bus. I had to dive in and do a review of what went into what made, how it was made, all sorts of stuff. And I'm like, guys, this is functional food, because they've just ripped through 6,000 calories and annihilated their glycogen, and they're doing it again tomorrow. Yeah,
try eat that amount of glycogen from blueberries. You're eating 7 kilograms of blueberries after a stage.
Yeah, exactly. So we used to do a thing where it was like a precursor to Hexus, actually. We with myself and Nikki Strobel, who's now at Israel, we calibrated a system where we could make quite specific recommendations for each rider if they wanted to. It wasn't compulsory. It was this service is here if you want it. we'd know what the menu was because Nikki was cooking it, and then we could make recommendations based on the work that they'd done, their RMR, that kind of stuff in the day, right? And so you'd give someone the option, listen, it's rice or risotto. What do you want? And I always remember one of the riders, I'm sure he won't mind me saying, Jack Bauer, big Kiwi guy, super nice fella, like really cool guy. And he was like, man, I'm a bit done with pasta. Can I have risotto? And I was like, oh, are you sure? So risotto rice absorbs 5 times its own weight in water.
Yeah.
Versus pasta, which is only 3 times, and pasta has a higher density of carbohydrate anyway. So there's already differences within, rice and pasta. People think they're the same. They're not.
I never knew that.
Just simple things to think about, right? And so, and he was like, can I have, I'm going to have risotto. And I was like, I did the math on it, and I was like, oh man, you need like a kilo of risotto. Like, I'm really sorry, but like to hit that, because he's a big guy, super strong, had been just nailing it all day. And I was like, man, I'm like have bread and honey, have dessert, everything. And I was like, orange juice, unless you want to have a beta fuel with dinner, the only thing I can get, like the closest I can get you to is a kilo of risotto. He was like, well, I'll have a good go. And like, I don't know if he finished it, but he was like, fuck, that's a lot of food.
Do you think there's a danger in the idea of no food is good or bad? It's context matters. Do you think there's a danger in weekend warriors misconstruing that message and sitting at home watching Netflix eating Haribo going, well, the lad said no food is good or bad, and missing the nuance to the conversation?
Yeah, exactly. And fuel for work required. Like, contextually appropriate. Like, do you need a very dense source of carbohydrate that's readily digested when you're sat on the sofa watching Netflix? No. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm sure it feels lovely, but and there's a time and a place, and I'm not saying don't, never do it, but it's contextually appropriate, right? If you've finished your longest ride of the week and you're pretty cooked, you know what? Actually having some Haribo as part of your recovery in those first kind of couple of hours afterwards, it's really going to help boost your glycogen restorage, resynthesis rates, and probably help you recover for the next session.
Hey everybody, let's take a quick break to talk about the bike I'll be riding this season, Reap. I've been lucky enough to ride all the top brands in the world over the past few years, but these Reap bikes, they're not the same, and I'll tell you why. Reap is the first company I've seen that isn't chasing sales targets and the mass market. They're chasing something very rare, perfection. Every bike they make, it's crafted in the UK factory, and it's not about slapping a Made in Britain label on a bike from a Chinese factory. It's about control. From the first sketch to the final build, they're hands-on, ensuring that every detail is dialed in. That's very rare in an outsourced world of mass production. What sets them apart is innovation. While others pump out the same old designs, Reap's pushing boundaries. They're not following trends, they're setting trends. Think precision and performance, like an F1 car for the road. Absolutely no compromises. And it shows, and you can feel it when you ride the bikes. These bikes are built for riders who demand the best, whether they're chasing podiums or just want a machine that feels like an extension of your body, a piece of art. It's not hype, it's substance. Ride a Reap for yourself, and you're riding something crafted with intent. So if you're serious about cycling, check them out. It's reapbikes.com. I absolutely love my one, and I couldn't recommend it highly enough. Back to the show. We used to think there was a glycogen re-uptake window straight after training. I remember hearing about this first and literally setting a stopwatch on my phone as soon as I come in the door saying, I have 15 minutes here to get my glycogen back into me. So it was things like I had friends riding for Team Sky at the time and they were using chocolate milk, so I started using chocolate milk. Do we still believe there's a glycogen reuptake window that's that time sensitive?
Yeah, good question. So my answer is that it's there are a couple of biological elements that underpin why there is a potentially like a time frame to it, but biologically does it change from 29 to 30 minutes? No.
It's back to your dimmer versus switch analogy.
Exactly. So if you are low enough in glycogen, so if you empty the tank, you actually have a period of what's called insulin independent glucose uptake. So your muscles they crave glucose that much that they will absorb sugar from the blood without the presence of insulin. You don't need insulin to drive the glucose transporter to the peripheral of the cell to pull in glucose, right? That's how like biologically developed we are to absorb carbs and store glycogen. So, and that window is kind of, that happens at very, very low muscle glycogen levels. And once you get back to, let's say, 200 millimoles of it's a really nebulous number. Once you get back to like a level of glycogen inside the muscle, it then goes, cool, all right, I've actually, I've recouped a little bit, and the rate slows down, and then it kind of becomes insulin dependent, and that's fine. So, it's one of those things when the tank's empty, it fills up really fast, but then as it starts to get fuller, that rate slows down.
Okay. Now here's the big question. Can I recover with a beer?
Can you recover with a beer? So, I mean, it's a fermented food. Maybe it's good for your gut microbiome. No, can you recover with a beer?
Or how many beers do I need to drink to recover? I guess the question is maybe, is there certain, to couch it in sort of maybe a more scientific term and keep with the rest of the podcast, is there certain stuff that inhibits the carbohydrate absorption? Like, will alcohol inhibit the carbohydrate content absorption? And then on the flip side of that, is there anything that aids the carbohydrate absorption? Like if I have a Coca-Cola, which is obviously readily available sugar, but it's paired with caffeine, does that help the reuptake?
Yeah, good question. So I mean, on the on the beer front, obviously being flippant about it, but it's it will dampen your recovery rate. So it also alcohol also reduces muscle protein synthesis, so that kind of remodeling process will also, I know, it's devastating, isn't it?
Because I heard Valverde used to have a beer after training every day.
Okay, yeah, right.
He also had EPO.
There's other things in that locker. So, and I think, I actually don't know the direct impact of like alcohol per se on glycogen resynthesis. I actually don't know if that's ever been done as like a research study. Maybe it has.
I'll try my hand up if you want to research it.
Listen, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, isn't it? So, I'm not 100% sure on that, but it definitely dampens muscle protein synthesis. So like the recovery process overall will definitely be dampened somewhat. And, if you look at your Whoop data and stuff, you'll probably have a worse night's sleep. That kind of, so there's like compounding effects there, right? And in terms of, are there things that you can do to aid the rate of glycogen uptake? So you are right. Readily available sugars in that kind of early window are going to be the things that create that really high rate of resynthesis. So that's a good thing to go for. You are right. Like Coca-Colas, Haribo's, any of those, any kind of sugary foods are pretty good. Chocolate milk's great because it also comes with electrolytes and protein, and it's a mixture of sugars that will also go to the liver and the muscle. So like lactose, which is galactose and glucose stuck together, that'll go to the liver. It will get separated. So some of the carbs will get stored in you, because you also have a store of glycogen in your liver. So that will begin to resynthesize, and the glycogen stores in your muscle will begin to resynthesize.
Is there anything that blocks it? I'm thinking in terms of a lot of time I'll come in from training and of the big Vitamix blender, the one you've seen the infomercials for, you can blend a set of golf clubs.
Oh,
you
sure.
Stick them in, blend your mobile phone, whatever you want.
Yeah.
I haven't tried it yet, but it's nice to know.
Yep.
Like, I love this kind of nice to know. Like my watch, it's great for 100 meters in water. I'm never going to go to 100 meters around my watch, but it is cool to know if I drop it in the sink, it's going to be okay.
Yep.
So I know this blender has the power if I need to call on that power at any point.
Yeah.
But when I'm making my recovery drink after training, I'm kind of just going around the kitchen and throwing stuff in. I roughly know the amount of carbohydrates I want to get into it. So I'm looking, at sources like fruit, honey, or maple syrup, throwing stuff in like that, maybe a spoon of Nutella. But is there anything that I shouldn't be putting into it? Like if I start to put a scoop of ice cream into that with higher fat content, is that going to slow down the absorption of carbohydrates?
Yeah, you nailed it. That was going to be kind of where I'd go with that, is as the fat content increases, particularly saturated fat, what you're doing is you're essentially slowing down the digestion process a little bit. So, and that will delay the rate of glycogen resynthesis. So it's not necessarily that the fat blocks it per se, but what it'll do is it'll slow down the rate of digestion, so that carbohydrate won't be available in your blood as quickly.
For girls listening to the podcast, is there a mistake of using male-derived research and applying that to female athletes?
Yeah, really good question. So I I think in some contexts, or in a lot of contexts, yes, there is. For things like, to my knowledge, for things like glycogen resynthesis, again, because the recommendations are given in grams per kilo of body mass, so to really maximally drive glycogen resynthesis, you'd be looking at 1 to 1.5 grams of carbohydrate for every kilogram of body mass per hour for the first 2 to 3 hours, depending on how big a session you were. So like 1.5 grams per kilo for 3 hours is what World Tour riders would do. Like average Joe, who's
World Tour male riders.
World Tour male riders, well, or female actually, because it's relative to body mass, and generally speaking, the female riders have lower total body mass, so the carbohydrate amount scales appropriately. And so, but for your kind of run of the mill, sorry, excuse me, that's a terrible way to phrase it. For recreational riders, because I'm very much at the bottom end of that, you'd probably be at like 1 gram of carbohydrate for every kilogram of body mass for the first hour, maybe 90 minutes. After exercise, and that's a greater way to sort of really drive good glycogen resynthesis, but without massively overfueling. And again, because those recommendations are made on a gram per kilo basis, that scales more appropriately as body size changes as well. And so it'll be more, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how, as actually, do you know what, some of the on-bike stuff is predominantly done in men. But there have, the women have been involved in those studies since, early 2008, when the first glucose fructose type studies also started to come out as well. And so I don't envisage there being a huge biological difference in like on-bike fueling. But, as a lot of people point out, we probably need to do more contextually appropriate research in females.
Yeah, I'm sure menstrual cycle must play some sort of role in it as well.
Yeah, I think there's, I think there's a lot of, I say that actually, I think there's a lot of suggestion around how you treat or how you respond to a symptom. So like a perceived symptom of, and again, female physiology, not, for a start, I'm not a female. Like I don't have contextual experience of what it's like to have different physical, perceptual feedback loops across different stages of my menstrual cycle. So, but from some of the great work that like Kirsty Elliott-Sale does, and kind of researchers like that, it's actually, we're looking at, nutritionally, if you see regular patterns that occur in how you feel across different stages of your menstrual cycle, then how do you use different components of nutrition to kind of align with what you expect to happen? Because of course, a menstrual cycle can vary from one cycle to the next in its length, so it's not always going to occur on the same day. But I think there's certainly much better researched and contextually experienced people than me to answer that. But I think there's definitely, it's looking at the regular symptoms that occur, and then what kind of nutritionally can you do to help support those.
To ground this conversation and bring back to some practical takeaways for people listening to it, because it's definitely been a science heavy chat. What are stuff that I should do right now if I'm someone coming into this, and we use that, two worldviews, my old as in it was still my predominant worldview until this conversation, sure, of I need to create massive deficit every day to lose weight, and I'm not really, nutrition's kind of an afterthought in my life. I'm living my life, nutrition's an afterthought, to this new version, Anthony 2.0. When we think about setting up my new nutrition system, am I taking supplements in this, or are the supplements, like they're named, supplemental? Are they an afterthought?
Yeah, good question. I'm gonna say it's Anthony AI, because we're 2.0's old hat now. So I think there's probably a function of like, is it convenient and useful to you? I'm okay with, supplements are just that, right? They're supplements to a diet. If you're inherently vitamin D deficient, supplement with vitamin D. Most people who live in the Northern Hemisphere would benefit from that. So, and that's fine, right? And I do think supplements are supplements to a diet. So, if you eat a 5 to 7 portions of fruit and veg of different colors, and you know, protein sources from, you know, legumes and pulses, whatever it is, if you're, you know, vegan, or animal sources, fish, if you're, you know, omnivore or pescatarian. You know, kind of, you piece different foods together and they all have different useful ingredients, right? It's contextually appropriate. But equally, sometimes I think if it's just not convenient to do that, it's fine to use a supplement to support you where appropriate.
Is there, maybe I phrased that question wrong, is there supplements actually, and now that I think of it, David did give me 3, so it'll be interesting to see if you have the same answer to this question. Is there supplements that everybody should be taking almost regardless of the individual variances in diet?
Yeah, again, I think the most prevalent one that I come back to is vitamin D.
Yeah, you gave that one.
That's certainly the most common one I think that comes up. I mean, outside of that, I really step back quite a bit from it generally. Like I don't know if I could give you 3 that I would say everyone should take. I mean,
he threw in creatine.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, you could do that.
And his third one, which I don't take, is fish oils.
Yeah, okay. Again, yeah, you could do that. So the creatine one, probably wholly beneficial if you're exercising regularly. If you do 3, you know, like 3 sessions a week at your local gym class, or there's a, you know, like you're a healthy, active individual. Do you need creatine from a physical performance perspective? Probably not.
Some good news studies though around cognition and Alzheimer's.
Exactly.
For creatine.
Yeah. So, you know, there might be a cognitive component to creatine as well, in which case, again, maybe that's something that try it and, you know, try and have a little diary on how do you feel during the day.
I think with creatine, from what the studies I've seen on it, there doesn't seem a downside to trying it.
No, I don't think there is. I mean, a few years ago there was that, or there was a bit of a narrative around, well, is it detrimental to your kidneys and processing and that kind of stuff, which I think has largely been kind of disproved. But also for the sort of general person taking it now, it's not how it was when it was done in gyms for gaining mass. Yeah. So you don't do a load phase where it's 20 grams a day.
Yeah,
it's
I'm just 5 grams.
Exactly. Yeah. So 5 to 10 grams a day is generally fine for most people, and you can sustain that for long periods of time. So, yeah, creatine, you could, I guess I've always thought of creatine as having like what's it for? I don't know.
I don't know. I just listen to you guys.
Well, yeah.
So we've set up kind of supplements for the guys. And again, I think a good way to think about them is what it's called supplemental. A better way to think about setting up this new move to Anthony AI is focusing on the core of what we've talked about today, fuel for work required. A book we referenced in the conversation with David was Atomic Habits. And apart from the Atomic Habits book that I loved was the idea of when you have a big goal, actually forget about the big goal and break it down to its smallest constituent part. Can we create a habit change, doing something small? So through that framing, if I'm trying to go from my old worldview to the Anthony AI worldview, what's the smallest changes I can make to start creating this momentum?
Yeah, good question. Can I give you my lived example of this?
Please do.
So, well, actually, what's the sort of daily government suggested recommendation of fruit and veg intake per day?
I don't know. I'd say 5.
Yeah, so 5 to 7 portions of fruit and veg a day, right? Now, I, of all people, have no excuse for not getting that, right? I know every reason. No, I don't know every. I know most of the reasons why every component of those is good for me. Do I get 5 portions of fruit and veg a day every day? No. Do I fuck? So, and it's behavior, right? So I realized that. So we have like a nice fruit bowl which we put fruit in our house like each week when we go shopping, and there was apples there, and I was like, oh, they'd go a bit soft, and I'd mush them up, put them in apple crumble or something, and but I wasn't eating them. And one day my wife was like, oh, I'm cutting up an apple. Do you want some? I was like, yeah. Oh, thanks very much. And she cut it up, like took it off the core and just cut it into strips, gave it to me, and I was just ate it away whilst I was on the laptop. I realized that the act of crunching through an apple, for some reason for me, I'm like, oh, that's too much hard work. I can't be asked. So I don't do it. So now every day when I go into the kitchen from the office, I cut an apple up. And if I do that, I know for a fact that I'll eat it. Yeah. And it's like, it's that smaller change.
It's just the friction.
Correct. Exactly. Yeah. I don't know what, and it's completely illogical and irrational.
No, it's quite logical, because if you think about it, you can use
see what I
friction
mean?
both ways, though. Like,
Exactly. Yeah.
I've used friction in the past to defeat habits that aren't very productive or useful. A good example, I used to be an avid reader. I'd nail through a book each week, and I found myself through the years going, I'm really shit at reading. And it's because every time I was halfway through a page, I pick up my phone and start flicking.
Yeah, okay.
So now I start creating friction. The phone goes into a different room, gets put into a drawer. So now to put the book down, I got to walk into another room, open a drawer. So it's an example of using friction the opposite way. 100%. You've taken friction out, I've added friction.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's creating really, like, honestly, like we said about how to create an energy deficit. You only need to make a really small change, but aggregating it over time adds up. And I think that's David would be the best person to give you, whether it's restructure the environment or whether it's motivate or, any of those other components that go into behavior. But like it's creating the smallest change that I think is the best.
It's almost like, if I'm going to go for a ride tomorrow morning, Saturday morning's a good example for a club meetup spin. Friday night, my set of behaviors and habits are, I check the weather forecast for the next day. I lay out my kit for the next day. I lay out my fuel for the ride for the next day. I make sure my SRAM batteries are charged, my hammerhead's charged. Everything's ready to go. So the next morning when I wake up, there's very little friction. It's easier to do it than not do it. And I think that's a good example of how could we take that routine and bring that into the nutrition world. So it's easier to live this new system than not live this new system.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that like we wanted to do with Hexus as well, is like, how much should I eat? Cool. We'll remove a point of friction in trying to understand what that is. But again, it's reducing cognitive load. We talked about it like at the top of the episode. And like if you can just reduce as much cognitive load. I also think there's you mentioned it before, like there's a community thing there. Like I know one of the designers and product managers who works for us. Like she has a really active community group of cyclists in London that she's part of.
Interesting.
And they talk about fueling on bike. They talk about like going in, they go and do, like they'll go and document, I think they're trying to ride round or go to all the top 100 pastry shops in London.
That's
something like that.
In this group.
Do you know what I mean? Like there's things like that where I think there's actually like a really and it takes, and don't get me wrong, like it's not just straight up easy. Like it takes a little bit of work, but I think there's a community element to that which can help to, everything. Like why is parkrun so successful? Because if you want to get 1,000 people to run 5K on a Saturday morning, bring them all together, give them a fixed start time, lay out the route for them. It's doing all those little things, but it's bring people together.
But and I think actually if you use that idea of adding and removing friction from good habits and bad habits, on the far end, you can add friction to the bad habits around your diet. Like don't have a Uber Eats account. So if you do want to order a takeaway, you need to pick up the phone and have that infuriating wait and back and forth exchange rather than, the Amazon type model where it's like click it and it just arrives.
Tap and send.
It's like McDonald's. I had McDonald's on we use Just Eat here. And I had like McDonald's on it. I seen it was just too easy. I was watching a movie. It's like, oh, McFlurry. It magically just shows up at the door. And you're like, did I really need that McFlurry? Now I have the guilt about the McFlurry and the remorse.
And it's the same it's the same when you go shopping. Like if you don't have the foods in the house, it's more difficult to to find and eat foods that are not contextually appropriate for what you're doing.
We've all heard that expression of don't go shopping when you're hungry.
Yeah.
Could you extend the same analogy to don't make dietary choices when you're sleep deprived?
That's a good way to think about it. I think there's you're naturally more inclined to go towards high reward sugary foods when you're sleep deprived. And there's good underlying biology for why that is. So yeah, exactly the same. Like
I'd be interested to know what you were having for breakfast after nights out at Roller Alive. It wasn't oats.
No, it wasn't. I think it was tacos at about midday. But again, fish oils. I think we had fish. Those fish tacos maybe. So
I think we've covered a lot of ground. For anyone who hasn't checked it out, I am going to make a solemn commitment to you now. We're going to get you back on the podcast in insert time period, 3 months, 4 months, whatever.
Very good.
And
I'm in.
I'm going to go all in on Hexes. I'm going to actually use it. I'm going to park my, French crazy dietary preconceptions. And I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to eat more to get lighter. And I'm going to be your case study for this.
We'll do it.
Sam, really appreciate you flying across from the UK to sit with us here today.
That was grand.
Massively, massively beneficial conversation for anyone who takes the time to dissect it properly and listen over and back again.
Yeah, hope it was helpful. I think that's one of the great things about being able to, it was one of the great things about having podcasts like this, right? You can come and have these conversations, and like, if it helps people, awesome.
Yeah, they're not easy topics. They don't lead themselves well to a 60-second TikTok or a reel.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
Or a tweet. There's nuance to it though.
Sure. Yeah.
That's brilliant. I love that there's a platform where you can go no time limit. Yeah. To discuss really complex topics with brilliant minds.
Trying to explain constrained and additive energy expenditure in 60 seconds is difficult. So yeah, fair.
Sam, thank you very much. Really appreciate you. We'll chat to you.
Cheers.
We have 3 long-form podcasts every week. Some of them are 90 minutes or 2 hours long. And I realize you're busy. Sometimes it's hard to cut through the noise and figure out the signal, figure out what the important parts are of these conversations. So I've taken your feedback, and once a week I'm delivering to your inbox a newsletter called The Saturday Spin. It's a 4-minute read or less, and it's going to break down the very best thing I've learned on the podcast this week. So it's insights from the biggest names in the world tour, physiologists, sports psychologists, and coaches. It's completely free to sign up to the newsletter. All you have to do is go to roadmancycling.com, stick in your email address, and once a week on a Saturday morning, I will deliver the Saturday Spin newsletter direct to your inbox. The link is down below. Go sign up.